Good morning. It's wonderful to have you all with us again today. We're here at the Greatest Gift and Scripture Supply in Pueblo, Colorado. The rest of our book club is making their way down the stairs. And we are so pleased today to have Angie Breidenbach back with us, hosting our bridal event, the book event for Lassoed by Marriage. And today's story is Mule Days by Lisa Carter, who is here with us as well. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
This is my friend Lisa Carter, and she is a sister author with me in the Lassoed by Marriage romance collection. And if you haven't seen this book, or you've never seen a book like it, the Lassoed by Marriage romance collection is 9 novellas by 9 different authors, and all of them are about 20,000 words. I like to call this kind of an anthology the Busy Woman's Book, because it's a fantastic book to be able to read if you are super busy, you work, you just don't have a lot of time. You can do a story easily in a short time, and then we have the pleasure of coming to you live today and getting to tell you a little bit about the stories behind the stories of the Lassoed by Marriage romance collection. And my friend Lisa Carter is she's a very fun and humorous author, and she is coming to you also from her home office. And we were just talking for a minute ago that it's very interesting when you work at home. And she's lucky enough that she has her office and her husband has his. And I'm going to let her continue to tell you a little bit of the story behind the story of the Mule Days from the Lassoed by Marriage romance collection. So, and then afterwards, we're going to have a few minutes for a Q&A that you'll be able to ask questions, and she'll be able to answer. And anyone online who wants to ask a question, we'll do our best to get yours into. Here's Lisa Carter.
Hello, everyone. It's so good to be here today. I feel like in some ways that I'm coming home. My in-laws lived in Colorado for almost 20 years. They retired and they moved to a little town. I don't know if you've even heard of it. It's Cedar Edge, Colorado, which is, I guess, the closest big town to that would be Grand Junction. And so over the years, our family has traveled quite often from North Carolina, where I'm from and where we live now, to Cedar Edge, Colorado. And often we would spend time in Denver and Colorado Springs. And, you know, I think that very first year when we were doing a lot of exploration when they first moved there, I think we flew in one time to Denver, drove to Colorado Springs to do some tourist type stuff, and then to get over to their house across the mountains, we took the more southerly route, and I think we drove through Pueblo. So if I'm correct in remembering what we did, I have actually been to your town, which you know, is quite surprising that somehow we have this previous connection. But it was such a delight to write Mule Days in the Lassoed by Marriage collection, and I hope readers had as much fun reading this story as I had in writing it. And just to give you a little background about how this story came about, I was invited to submit some proposals for this collection made up of about 9 authors, and so I submitted several proposals, and I got a middle-of-the-night inspiration about this particular story, which became Mule Days. And so at 3 in the morning, literally, I got up, I went downstairs, got on my computer, and just this whole idea came to me. And it was a fun idea, and I was probably a little slap-happy, to tell you the truth, at 3 in the morning. But that is the proposal that they ended up selecting to put into this collection. And there is an actual Mule Days festivity that takes place in Benson, North Carolina, which is maybe an hour and a half from where I live. And I've only been to it one time when I was a child, and so I have sort of vague memories of it. But when I began to research and write this story, I discovered that Mule Days was kind of a common thing. There were a lot of different states that put together Mule Days celebrations. I think maybe the first one started in the 1840s, and it was maybe called Breeder Days back in those days. Columbia, Tennessee is the self-proclaimed mule capital of the world, and so they have this tremendous Mule Days Festival. And in doing my research, I studied the websites of these festivals to see what kind of events they offered, and I adapted a lot of that to some of those really fun and humorous activities that our characters were engaged in during the Mule Days celebration of Hitching Post, Montana. In fact, I think there is a Mule Days celebration in Colorado, and it's called Donkey Derby Days. And it's in the last week of June every year, and it's in a town called Cripple Creek, Colorado, which I have no idea where that is. But you
beautiful up in the mountains, yep.
Good, good. So when I was writing this story, my scripture, the theme that kind of really came to life for me as I was portraying these characters in the story, came from Romans chapter 8, verses 15 and 14 and 15, and it's from the Message, the contemporary translation, and it goes something like this: God's Spirit beckons. There are things to do and places to go. This resurrection life you receive from God is not a timid, grave-tending life, but it's adventurously expectant, greeting God with a childlike, "What's next, Papa?" And for me, that sort of summarized the main character, Hattie's approach to life, and indeed her entire journey through this story to finding her happily ever after with Brax in Mule Days. As far as what's going on with me, as I told you, I'm from North Carolina. I've been writing about 6 or 7 years. My 7th romantic suspense novel is coming out March 15th. I'm actually more well known for writing romantic suspense. Mule Days is my first historical novella, and it was such a lot of fun that I'll be doing another one that is coming out in October that is based around the building of the Transcontinental Railroad and those end of rails town. And then in January, I have a 3rd historical novella, and I believe that one is based on matchmaking. And it's set in a little town in Wyoming. And then I have a 4th historical novella coming out in February, which that's the one I'm supposed to be writing right now instead of talking to you all, but really not telling you. Okay? I'm playing hooky this afternoon to talk to you, and I'm supposed to be writing that story. So that's going to be our little secret. And that one is based on American heiress. In my story, I'm talking about a silver heiress that runs away from her family expectations and, of course, is going to find true love. As far as the other types of writing, mainly I've done romantic suspense. In fact, if you can see behind me, I'm kind of pointing. My novel, Under the Turquoise Sky, is set in New Mexico, and it won the Carroll Award for Romantic Suspense for 2015. And some other romantic suspense titles I have done have also been set in the Southwest because like I said, we did a lot of visiting there when my husband's family was living out there. Beneath the Navajo Moon, I'm pointing at, if you can see that, that is set on the Arizona side of the Navajo Reservation. One that came out last September is Beyond the Cherokee Trail, and that is set in the mountains of North Carolina, where I'm most familiar with. On the other side of my head, I'm pointing now, I kind of feel like Vanna, Vines of Entanglement is set in the South, in North Carolina, and it is probably your more traditional mystery, whereas the other ones are more suspense, thriller-oriented. And then Carolina Reckoning was actually my first novel, and again, that is set in North Carolina, so it's more southern traditional fiction mystery. Then, in addition to these romantic suspense books that I'm doing, I write a Coast Guard series, contemporary romance for the love-inspired line, and I have a series that takes place on the eastern shore of Virginia, which is a wonderful place that I enjoy going to at least once a year to visit old friends, and to which I was first introduced when I was in my 20s, when I was there as a summer missionary intern. And the first one of those books came out last year, and it's the little book It's called Coast Guard Courtship, and my second in that series comes out in May, Coast Guard Sweetheart, and truthfully, in the same kind of way that Mule Days was so much fun to write, that second Coast Guard book, which is coming out soon, it was a lot of fun to write. It was just very sweet. Those characters, I think, will appeal to a lot of readers. I have just turned in the third of the Coast Guard series that'll be out in the fall, and I'm working on the fourth of a total of 7 for Love Inspired. So that is what I'm going to be doing. Instead of talking to you, that's what I'm going to get back to doing here today. But I have really enjoyed being able to write suspense and then being able to write contemporary romance. And then also this latest thing that I've been involved in with Angie in writing historical novellas. And it was a lot of fun during the research. It was a lot of fun to at least travel in my mind to Montana. I had the opportunity to go to Montana several years ago. That's the only time I've ever been there. We went to Laughing Water Ranch, which is near Fortine, Montana. That's not too far from the Canadian border, and our family enjoyed riding horses and just kind of having the Wild West experience. And I'm just so familiar with your section of the Southwest. I've really enjoyed all of the trips we made to Colorado. Unfortunately, I don't have any more trips to Colorado in my future because my mother-in-law recently unretired, if that's a word, and ended up settling back here in North Carolina so she could be close to the children and grandchildren and that kind of thing. So now I don't have an excuse to come out there anymore unless you all invite me to come. So anyway, I'm living vicariously today by being able to talk to you online and just sort of get that Colorado feel back again. So that is just some things I wanted to share with you about where Mule Days actually came from. And I do love these opportunities to connect with readers, whether through a video chat like this or if you could find me on Facebook and Twitter. I even have on Pinterest, if any of you are into that, I make a board for each of the novels that I do so that you can see some of the behind-the-scenes photos of my inspiration, why I wrote it, how my characters came to be, some of the settings that take place in the novel, or at least how I visualize them to be. So right now I'm going to turn it over to Angie again and Heather, and if you have any questions, I'll try my best to answer them.
Okay, I'm kind of glad you said you turning over to me for a second because I'm going to show you some of her Pinterest boards, and so give me just a second to. Last time I did this, I needed to put the presentation on the store, and then I will share my screen, and I'll show you. There we go. There we go. This is Lisa Carter's Pinterest board, and to get to the board, you would put in. She's got it under. Lisa Cox Carter is actually her name, so let me copy that and I'll put that in for you here. So if you want to follow her on Pinterest, that's the link.
Can you make that larger for us?
The the on the screen for you, her Pinterest board, or the make what larger?
Her Pinterest board.
I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I can just put. It's just on the screen screen sharing, and there's not a way to do that from here. I apologize. There is sometimes when it'll have that pop out where you can make it share the whole screen, but this one is the whole screen. So this is what she did for Western Novella Collections. She's got the Lassoed by Marriage book right here in Mule Days, which is really fun. And if you don't know Pinterest, all you have to do is click pin, and then you can go down and find the book that it belongs to. And for me, I'm pinning it to my own board, and this is my novella in it. So I'm going to pin her novella into mine, which is really fun, and that'll share it with other people. And you can see some of the other boards that she has. This is another one that we were in together, was the Quilts of Love, and she has all of her inspiration, the different quilts. I love that little turtle quilt there, Lisa. And even the Hawaiian legend behind the Hano green sea turtle. So it's fun stuff to be able to follow authors on Pinterest. It's and you'll never know what you're going to find for what inspired them. So that was a really fun thing to see and to do. Oh, look at, she's got leopard bread. So fun stuff. So if you just go to Pinterest, you'll be able to follow. Whoops, you don't need that. That's me learning how to share my screen. Didn't even know that was still up. So, okay. So those are some of the fun things that you can do while getting to know an author is follow them on social media like Pinterest and things like that. So, Heather and the gang there in Pueblo, Colorado at the Greatest Gifts and Scripture Supply store, what questions do you have for Miss Lisa Carter?
What questions did you have when you were reading?
I had a couple of questions for her. I was sort of waiting to see if anybody else did.
Go ahead.
This is sort of a general question, and then I have a specific one for you. But we read these novellas, and I like it because you can sit down in one night and read it.
Yeah.
And you sort of get the whole thing all in one piece.
Mm-hmm.
But I noticed, too, that it's obvious these things could be expanded. Have you ever thought of taking a novella and say, well, that's going to be a seed for a full novel?
Usually I have the large books that I do that are contracted to be like 80 to 90,000 words, and then the novellas, as Angie told you, are usually 20,000 or a little bit less. And you know, if you went into it thinking that you wanted to make it a larger book project, you could certainly do that, and probably there are authors out there who have done that. So far, I have not done that. I've had my larger books, which are mainly suspense, and then my contemporary romance books are a little smaller. They may be about 60,000 words. And then I've done these historical novellas, which are around 20,000. But I think you're right that people really do enjoy the novellas, and it's become very popular among readers because you can kind of consume it all in one sitting and get everything and not have to forget characters, but keep it all together straight in your mind in one sitting.
But yeah, I've actually heard that from several of the people who weren't able to be with us today, is that they didn't want it to end. They wanted more. So that's a nice compliment for you. But yeah, it was so much fun to read. I could definitely see there being more to it.
On this one, Mule Dazed, I wanted more on the end, but I also wanted more at the beginning because it mentions a few times that she had known this guy before.
Yeah.
I thought you could write a whole book and talk about how she'd known and how they separated and how they got back together.
That's right. And you know, oftentimes when you're writing something that you're only allowed 20,000 words, for a writer, it's more convenient to have the characters in some way already know one another, because then you don't have to waste a lot of page space, which is very precious when you're talking about only 20,000 words. You don't have to go through all of those getting to know you, introduction kind of things that you would in a larger novel, because we just don't have room for it. And so, yes, in my mind, in my imagination, I pictured all of those things you're referring to that I only mentioned very briefly, but in the planning of it, I had to go through in my mind and imagine and picture how they would have interacted when they met as children, and all of those escapades that they mention, and you know, the things that set them at odds with each other initially. But of course, we know that that was where the seeds of their future romance were sown. I could not go into detail on those, but for me as the writer, I had to know it before I wrote it. And I think that too is something that the readers can do. When the book finishes at a certain point, in your own mind, you can flesh it out even further and come up with additional chapters to you know, entertain yourself, because as a child that's probably how I started writing before I ever called myself a writer. I would see something on television and maybe I wouldn't like the way it ended, or maybe it ended too soon in my opinion, and I could think of further adventures for them, and so I would just go to bed that night and put myself to sleep telling myself the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say. And so I think when I read things now, sometimes characters just really they enchant us, certain characters, and we enjoy thinking about them, and we enjoy thinking what else the rest of their life would be like. And so I do that too, and it just shows you have a wonderful, vivid imagination.
That's that I think we should turn this series into like a television series. Wouldn't that be fun?
That would be fun.
And then you can have like one particular episode can be the prequel, and then you can kind of see all those things happen, and you could do this whole great television series. So I think this would be a perfect television series where every episode is a different character and stuff like that, but there's, you know, you get a little bit more time to know them.
My other question is more special for you, Lisa.
Okay.
You surprised me when you started talking about all these books you've written, and you've been doing this for 6 or 7 years.
Yes.
Do you just do stream of consciousness and just write a whole book all in one setting, or what do you do to get all those out so fast?
Well, when you're under deadline and people have paid you to write this book, you kind of have to put your butt in the chair and just get to it. But yes, it can be very stressful. It's a lot of fun talking to readers and doing appearances with book signings and different events. In fact, in a week or so, I'm teaching at a conference, so I get to do all of these great things. But there is a lot of stress that maybe writers don't always tell you about, because a lot of times I'm having to write one novel, but then edits on another one that I've already turned in may come back to me, and so I have to stop the one that I'm writing, the first draft, try to do the edits for the second draft of another, and then potentially there could be a third book that has just hit the shelves, and I'm helping the sales and marketing department to publicize that new book which has come out. And that's basically how especially the last 4 or 5 years have been for me. And it's a wonderful, blessed thing to have that many contracts, but at the same time it's kind of a juggling act, also being a wife and a mother and being involved in church and community activity. So for instance, when my next romantic suspense comes out on March the 15th, it's called The Stronghold. That one is coming out like on a Tuesday or Wednesday, and I'm going to have to be on Facebook, and there'll be different blogs that I'm guest posting on and different things like that. But at the same time, like I mentioned earlier, I'm trying to write this 4th historical novella, and I'm editing the 3rd contemporary romance with Love Inspired, and I also have that 4th Love Inspired that will be due in a few months. And so it's a lot of projects you have to juggle at one time, and I write very fast, which is a blessing, because I could not have handled all of these contracts without that. And you know, every writer has their own process, their own different speed. I enjoy the research of it. I enjoy the writing of it. And then, you know, there's just all of these other things that come under an author's hat these days. So it's certainly never dull, it's never boring, but you have to be very organized and really aware of what's going on in your calendar.
Definitely. Wow.
Yeah. You mentioned several books coming out this year.
Yes.
There was 4 or 5. I mean, and they're different.
They are.
Yeah.
The Stronghold, which is, say that again?
Does it help to do a different one to kind of clear your mind, get away from this one, and then do the next one?
I think so. That's one of the reasons why I like doing different things, because I have written 7 romantic suspense books. The 7th one's coming out in a week or so. And you know, you get tired of killing people on paper after a while, and you need a break. And so that is when I turn to my contemporary romance, the Coast Guard series, which is a lot of fun. It's a beach community. It's got all of those eccentric characters for which the South is kind of known, and we are a fun group. I mean, I'm just going to tell you that. We are fun, and it's fun doing those books. There's a lot of food, there's a lot of family, there's a lot of community, as well as the two couples who are falling in love. And so that's a nice break from, like I said, killing people on paper for a living, which is what I do. And then in a different way, the historical is a nice escape into what I know from our perspective we sometimes think is a simpler time. I don't know that that was necessarily so, but that is our perception of it. And what a lot of people don't realize is that I was a teacher in my previous life. I taught at the college, high school, and middle school levels over the years, and I have a master's in history. And so for all these years, I've been pumping out these romantic suspense novels and contemporary romance novels, and people would say, well, why don't you ever write a historical novel, because that is what your degree is in. And I just didn't. I guess after teaching it all those years, I wanted to change. So now it was just so really neat to have this opportunity to go back to the background that I have and to delve into history, which is something I love, and I love the research that goes along, especially with the historical novels. So it's been fun, and I think you're right. It's good for me. It fits me to be able to go into different genres and therefore maybe not get burned out on any particular one.
Mm-hmm.
That is fun.
Wow.
It's
How long did you teach?
like cleansing your palate with a sherbet.
That depends on the deadline and the editor.
How long did you teach, Lisa?
I taught about 8 years in the public school system, and I did a year or two at the college level, but when I married and started having children, I was able to stay at home for many years just to be with my children, and at that point I was really, really involved with my children and their schooling and church and community type activities. But all along I had this secret dream, this calling that I had felt ever since I was a child to write. That was how I often entertained myself as a child. I did a lot of reading because I think all writers start out being intensive readers, but even beyond the reading, it's like what I was telling you before. I would decide in my mind to finish the book a different way or to continue the characters' lives in a different way, and that's how I entertained myself, which was probably odd compared to most high school students. So when I came to a point in my life when my children were in middle school and I had a little bit more free time, God kind of nudged me and said, you know, you've had this secret desire to be a writer, and now is the time to pursue that. And so about 2009, I just sat down and I wrote that first book, which ended up being a more traditional mystery set in North Carolina, Carolina Reckoning. And from there, I have just, you know, received other contracts to pursue other fields of interest for me, and it's just been an amazing journey. It really has.
How fun.
You keep mentioning the contracts, and I understand that once you've been established as a writer, somebody might come as a publisher and say, could you write a book on this for me, and give you a contract. But that first one, you were not known as an author, and so nobody was giving you a contract to write it. How did you get it published?
Well, I attended several writing conferences where writers gather, and some of the writers are already published, some of them are pre-published, but it is at the conferences where the gatekeepers to the publishing industry, which includes agents and editors to publishing houses, they come. And so you come and meet and you take classes on growing in the craft of writing, and you also have opportunities to pitch, is what we call it, your proposal to publishers. And I was very fortunate that Abington Press gave me my first contract for Carolina Reckoning, and then others followed, including Aloha Rose, which I'm kind of pointing behind my head now. That was the series that Angie mentioned earlier that she and I were involved in together before this Lassoed by Marriage collection. It was a quilt series because it also, before I went back into writing, I did a lot of quilting. So a lot of my books still contain quilting, but I no longer have time to quilt because of all the deadlines. But this book was set in Hawaii, and that became my second novel that was published, and it revolved around kind of a mystery with a quilt pattern. It was wonderful, set in Hawaii, and it enabled our family to take a trip to Hawaii, which was a lot of fun, and my children kind of got carried away with that idea, and as we were coming back home from Hawaii, my youngest daughter mentioned, she says, you know, Mom, I really think if you're going to do this book thing that the next one ought to be set in Paris so we can go there too. So I think that kind of started. I have not written the Paris book yet, so no, we have not gone there yet, and my youngest daughter is still waiting for that. But you know, that is really how most writers get started, is you go to these conferences, you meet with the agents, you meet with the editors, and in today's world, you really do need an agent because publishers are no longer as willing to just take unsolicited material the way they did in the old days. And so it is a job, it's an education, and it's almost like going back to college again because there's certain things and ways to do things in the publishing industry, and you know, it's a profession. Like I said, it is a job, and you have to be committed to learning to better your craft, but also to better your understanding of how the publishing world works.
Bravo. Yep. What other thoughts and questions do y'all have for Lisa?
I guess I'm just amazed that you get so much done, but you
Yeah.
already covered that.
Yeah.
That is remarkable.
I work fast and I'm tired a lot.
You don't sleep much, do you?
Yeah, I
It wouldn't be your pastor and trying to get an appointment with you.
Let's see, Diane chimed in with a question that said, what conference are you teaching at next week?
I am teaching at a conference in South Carolina, which is called the Carolina Christian Writers Conference. And I will be there like a Friday and Saturday. And I'm going to be teaching creating characters so real you'll be tempted to add them to your Christmas list. That's one of the workshops. And actually, Angie, you'll love this. My second workshop I'm teaching is called So You Think You Want to Write a Novella, Huh? And that's the name of the workshop, and I'm going to be showing authors how we put together this Lassoed by Marriage collection, kind of a step-by-step process, because even though in a broad sense it's the same as writing any kind of novel, there's a little specialized details that you need to know to write only 20,000 words and to get the whole story, their entire emotional, physical, and spiritual journey in just 20,000 words. And then the third workshop that I'm going to be presenting is called Story Weaving, where I'll be sharing 10 tips for weaving the threads of a story together. Because I think when you write for Christian fiction, there is always going to be that spiritual thread plus the romance thread. And when I do suspense, the third thread is suspense. And all of those threads have to become interwoven in the main characters' lives to begin the journey, to take you all the way to the end of their happily ever after and solving the mystery or escaping from the villain if it happens to be suspense. Now, in our Lassoed by Marriage collection, it is not a suspense book, but I still had those three threads where I had the spiritual, I had to interweave the romantic journey, and I also had to interweave the historical aspects of the story. And so I think that workshop will be applicable for a lot of writers from different genres, because if you do write for Christian fiction, you've always got to weave in the spiritual as well. And you know, as a writer, that is my primary motivation, is to show how God is enough for any situation in which you find yourself, and how God is with you no matter what you're going through, from the beginning to the end. And it really is a journey. It's an adventure, hand in hand in faith in God.
Mm-hmm. That's really nice. As a store owner, the Christian fiction was always a kind of a tough piece. And trying to get people interested in it, I actually started reading it, and I'm fascinated. It's kind of like the life application study notes in a Bible. You know, this is how you put it into use in your daily life. Mm-hmm. And while their stories are a lot more grand than some of ours, it does show how God can be a piece of your life, regardless of the situation, and if it's a tragic situation, or a happy situation, or whatever. And I've really, really enjoyed that. I had a sales rep tell me one time, he said, you know, Christian fiction doesn't necessarily have a gospel message to it, but it shows you life through a Christian lens.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it just makes so much sense to me, because that's really how we view things, and it is different, and it's nice.
Everyone loves stories.
Yeah.
You know, Jesus told stories, and
Absolutely.
there's something in, I think, us as humans that responds to that. Really, the Bible is God's story to us. History is His story. And in the Bible, we see a completely and perfectly developed written story that goes from the creation, the beginning. It goes through the fall, and then it shows how God comes to the rescue, which, of course, I try to include that rescue, whether it's a cowboy rescuing our damsel in distress, but I try to model that rescue in all of my stories. And then at the end of God's story, we see the beautiful promise, the hope of restoration that we have one day with Him. And again, our epilogues, the final chapters in all of our novels and Christian fiction, we present that hallmark of hope, which is what we have in Christ Jesus.
Amen. Awesome.
Any other thoughts or questions or ideas? What you liked about the book or anything like that you'd like to share?
It was just so much fun to read.
Yeah.
The little twists, and I mean, even at the very beginning, the twist of, you think the little fella's a little fella, and then all of a sudden, there she is. Kind of things are really charming, and I like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really fun as an author in this collection to be able to read the other authors in the collection. And so I actually wrote a book review for my 8 other sister authors, because I didn't know, but just the description of the story that they were writing prior. And so it was really fun for me to be able to start reading and learning as we were doing this kind of an event. I wanted to make sure I was up with everybody on their stories in case I needed to know something, or if an author couldn't show up for some reason, something went wrong, they got sick. I wanted to make sure I knew their story so that I could work with the situation. And I have had so much fun reading the stories of the other authors. And one of the things I'll point out that Lisa mentioned was that when you're starting out as a writer, most writers, I would say, I really think all writers, but most writers, just in case I'm wrong, are very avid readers. And as you get into this really busy world of contract and meeting deadline after deadline and all of the things you have to do, I think the one thing that Lisa left out of that busy thing was sometimes you're also having to turn in proposals, or at least descriptions of stories for the next book you're going to write, or the one after that as well. And when you're doing all of that, you lose the time to read and to enjoy reading, just the act of reading. So it was really fun to me to sit down and read stories like Lisa's story, because I got to be a reader again, and not just in business reading. And I adore historical research, adore it. Spent the whole day in it yesterday. But not the same thing as holding a book or your Kindle or whatever you're doing, but holding a book in your hand and reading it and immersing yourself in a story. So to me, it's been delightful to just be a reader again, you know. So, oops.
Okay, Lisa, I want to follow that up with another question there. I'm amazed at how busy you must be with all these contracts and all these deadlines and everything coming back and forth, and yet you were an avid reader. Are you still an avid reader in the middle of all this?
I have to be, because my teenage daughter comes home from school about 3 o'clock and she commands the use of my computer to do her homework. And so that's the only saving grace for me being able to read, is that I have to surrender the computer to her. And so then I am forced, you understand, to sit on the couch and read some novels. And of course, you realize that that's still working. Because for an author, you know, we've got to feed that creative well, and reading is a way to do that. And so even if my husband comes downstairs and maybe wonders, aren't you supposed to be working? I am working, and I hope you all read that.
I have a question. I'm wanting to do something, just a simple biographical kind of thing about my husband for my family. And I wanted to just do it on my iPad when I'm sitting by him watching TV, and I can ask him stuff about when he was a kid and so forth. What kind of a program could I use that I can insert family photos and things into that easily? I just have an iPad, and I just downloaded something that my iPad is not compatible with, and I can't open up what I wrote. What can I put on that? Do you know?
Angie, I'm going to let you answer that question because you're more technologically savvy than I am.
I would suggest, it depends on if you want to learn a new program. My suggestion would be, if you're very serious about this, to spend the $49, I think it is, to buy Scrivener. Whether that will work on your iPad or not, I think it will. But Scrivener has different ways where you can write. You can write chapters, you can write notes, and it does have a little learning curve. And I'd highly suggest finding other people in your area, of which I know there are people in your area that know Scrivener, because there's a lot of writers there. I would suggest having Heather, if Heather doesn't mind, have a Scrivener workshop at the store. And
oh wow. Okay.
It would, honestly, it would be brilliant for all of you, and it would draw in not only those who want to write, like you said, family stories and things like that, but it would draw in some other writers for you too, because we're all still, you know, we all want to learn these kinds of things. And I think Scrivener has places you can put in photos and things like this, and then when you're all done with it, you can compile it into a book. And you can choose whether it's done in paperback, an ebook, and it will all. Oh, now the word has suddenly flown out of my mind. But it compiles together.
It converts it.
Thank you. And then it'll convert into the book of your choice, whether it's formatting for paper or whatever. But like I said, there is a learning curve, and there are some things to learn about it. But it's one of those things that's worth it. And you know, I don't know how old folks are there. I'm in my 50s, and one of the things I learned from my mother-in-law, who's 87, was to keep learning. And I love learning, but it keeps our minds young, and it keeps us healthy, and it keeps our brains healthy. So I would highly suggest, if Heather doesn't mind, Scrivener is one of the many options, but that's a great one because it will compile and then convert for you.
Thank you very much. That's really good information.
You betcha. Other thoughts or questions, ideas for Lisa?
It's just a comment on this book that we read, the Mule Days. When I first started reading it and saw them in the jail, and they said, "Okay, you're going to get married," I thought that can't happen. It's just so unrealistic. And then I thought, wait a minute, what time am I talking about?
Right.
In fact, shotgun weddings did take place because people were concerned about your reputation. Today, they just say, hey, Get out of here.
And I'm going to tell you, in some parts of North Carolina, you tick a Southern daddy off, and a shotgun wedding might still be happening.
Unfortunately, not in Colorado.
One of the things I'll note, too, is that I've had people read my historicals and say that's not realistic. And the reality is that was the law at that time. And a lot of the things that women today have rights to, including their children, that is a recent change. And it's really been more in the 1950s, 40s, 50s, and up. And in the 1800s, it's definitely women would not be awarded their children. So things like that, things like marriage, things like how the etiquette worked in historicals, very different. And like you said, we have to remember the time of the book and of the event.
I just thought it was neat to when you read some of these novels and they're set in a historical setting, you not only learn about the characters, but you learn something about the history of that time and the way things are done.
It's fun, and it makes you kind of make that transition in your mind and think about those things. It's interesting.
Well, even about the animals, you know, the mule.
Yep.
Yeah. How useful they were, especially here in Colorado with all our mining. They were an essential part.
Yep. That's why Donkey Derby Days is in Cripple Creek, because it was a mining town. They actually still have a mine out there
Yes,
that you can visit. You can go down in the mine shaft.
It's a working mine.
Yep.
I see another book coming for you. And now you can go visit them.
That's right. Another excuse to visit.
You got to go to Donkey Days.
You're welcome here anytime.
Thank you so much.
Do y'all have any other things that you would like to talk about with Lisa?
I don't think so.
It's just fun for me, I gotta say, as the kind of host of this, to get messages from my mom and my neighbors and friends throughout the store, throughout the weeks, of how fun this book is, and did you get to this one yet? And Mule Days was definitely among the favorites, so thank you.
Oh, that's awesome to hear.
Thank you. And you know, I thought the brothers were a lot of fun. I have no idea how Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy came to me, but I realized I needed 5 brothers, and then just all of a sudden, the names. And I wanted to tell their story just as much as I did Hattie and Brax's, and so it was fun putting the brothers in there.
I see a sequel coming.
Oh yeah. And I saw a question about someone wanting to be my research assistant when I make that trip to Paris, and come on, let's do it.
Diane, pack your bags, you're going to Paris. Okay, so I think what we'll do then is I'll have Lisa say a few last words, and we'll turn over the event back to the folks there at the store so your club can have your time together. So, Lisa, would you share with us any of your things you'd like to make sure to have a chance to share with the group?
I'm just so glad all of you enjoyed Mule Days. You know, I was able to access that inner bonanza in me, that inner big valley that I spent a lot of time as a child watching. And so it was a lot of fun to be able to transport myself and hopefully readers to that time and place. And just thank you so much for having me today and for reading Mule Days.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Well, then what I would like to do is make sure that you're all with us next week. Next week we're going to have some different books as well as the Lassoed by Marriage romance collection. We are going to take a look at Mary Keneally's novella, but we're going to learn our book club game, and it's called a String Story Slam. So we are going to string together some stories to create the most madcap, tromp through the pages of historical novels that you have ever seen. So we're looking forward to having you back next week with us, and we will learn a book club game that you can use in any book club or any group setting. And in fact, I know a business owner who did it for his Christmas party for his employees and had a blast.
Fun.
It'll be a really fun time to do with y'all. And so next week is the book club game. Please invite friends and family and whatever you want to do. And we'll be right back here Wednesday, 11 o'clock Mountain, at the Greatest Gifts and Scripture Supply store. And I will create an event online and send that link through and out and about so everyone can find it. And then we'll continue on after that with Miss Rebecca Jepson as our next one. So book club game, and then you'll meet Rebecca Jepson. So thank you so much for being with us. And Diane put a note, she's online, and she said, this was really fun. Thank you for coming, Lisa. And I think Lisa had to go and get back onto her her computer before her daughter comes home from school.
Thanks very much, Angie.
Thank you, and we'll see you next week.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.